I'm dating someone new. You mean nothing to me now, just disappear, my wife said, laughing in our bedroom. I responded, perfect, because your lover also got your videos. You'll be shocked by his reaction. The words came out calmer than I felt. Standing in the doorway of what used to be our sanctuary, briefcase still in my hand from my unexpected early departure from my downtown Chicago financial firm. I'd been looking forward to surprising Vanessa with takeout from Rosario's, that expensive Italian place on Rush Street where we'd had our first anniversary dinner, but instead found her tangled in our $1,000 Egyptian cotton sheets with Tony Marchetti, the arrogant real estate developer from the Lake Forest Country Club who'd been circling our social group like a shark for months. I should have felt rage, devastation, maybe even the crushing weight of 7 years of marriage dissolving before my eyes. But all I felt was a cold, analytical clarity settling over me like winter fog rolling in off Lake Michigan during a particularly brutal February. Vanessa didn't even bother covering herself when she saw me, just propped herself up on her elbows with that cruel smile I'd been noticing more frequently over the past few months, the one that appeared whenever she talked about our boring suburban life or made snide comments about my predictable routine. Oh good, you're finally home early for once. We really need to have this conversation. She gestured casually at Tony, who was lounging against our mahogany headboard like he owned the place, his expensive Rolex catching the afternoon sunlight streaming through our bedroom windows. Tony and I have been seeing each other for months now, Alex. What we have is real, passionate, everything our marriage never was and never could be. Her voice carried that condescending tone she usually reserved for explaining simple concepts to her interior design clients, like I was some dim-witted contractor who couldn't understand basic blueprints. Tony stretched lazily, making absolutely no move to leave or even show the slightest hint of embarrassment about being caught in another man's bed. Sorry about this, buddy, but Vanessa belongs to someone who can actually satisfy her now. You understand how these things work, right? The casual dismissal stung more than the actual betrayal, like I was some inconvenient business partner being politely bought out of a failing venture. She's been telling me all about your boring spreadsheets and your pathetic attempts at romance. Those weekend trips to Wisconsin, really? No wonder she needed a real man who knows how to show a woman a good time. His smugness was suffocating, filling the room like expensive cologne applied too heavily. I pulled out my phone, deliberately taking my time to scroll through my sent messages from earlier that morning when my instincts had finally overridden my trust. That's interesting timing, Tony, because I sent some very compelling videos to your wife Miranda about 3 hours ago, right around the time you were texting Vanessa about coming over for your usual Tuesday afternoon appointment. His smug expression flickered like a candle in a sudden breeze. What the hell are you talking about? What videos? I held up my phone, showing the security camera app I discreetly installed throughout our house 6 months ago after our Lincoln Park neighborhood had experienced a string of break-ins, though I'd started reviewing the footage more carefully once I noticed Vanessa's sudden interest in yoga classes that somehow never left her looking like she'd actually exercised. The ones from our comprehensive home security system. Crystal clear 4K footage from the last 8 weeks, with excellent audio quality thanks to the upgraded microphones. Miranda's probably watching them right now while you're here bragging about conquering another man's wife. The color drained from Tony's face faster than water down a sink. You recorded us without consent? That's completely illegal. Vanessa sat up sharply, suddenly very interested in legal technicalities. Alex, you can't just spy on people. That's a massive violation of privacy. I almost laughed at the irony. Actually, it's perfectly legal to record activities in my own home, especially in my own bedroom. And Miranda was extremely grateful when I sent her the evidence this morning with a detailed note explaining exactly how her husband has been using our marital bed for his extracurricular business activities. I watched Tony scramble for his scattered clothes like a man whose house was on fire, his earlier arrogance evaporating faster than steam from hot pavement. You absolute psychotic bastard. He was simultaneously pulling on his custom-tailored pants and frantically trying to dial his phone with shaking fingers. Miranda, sweetheart, I can explain everything that's happening here. But the call went straight to voicemail, and I smiled genuinely for the first time in months, feeling that familiar satisfaction I got when a complex financial analysis finally revealed the truth hidden in the numbers. Miranda called me at 2:47 a.m., her voice shaking with a rage I'd never heard from the typically composed socialite who chaired 3 different charity boards and never let anyone see her sweat. "Alex, I just finished watching every single video you sent me. Every single one." Her breathing was ragged, like she'd been running or crying, probably both. "I sat in my car for 4 hours in the parking lot of the Marriott where that bastard told me he was having a business dinner, watching my husband destroy our 22-year marriage in your bedroom while bragging about what an idiot I am." The pain in her voice was raw, immediate, but underneath it was something harder, more dangerous. "He's been lying about everything, Alex. Those business trips to Milwaukee, the late meetings with potential investors, the weekend conferences in Madison, all of it was lies so he could play house with your wife while making a fool out of both of us." I poured myself another scotch, settling into my leather recliner while Tony's wife detailed the systematic destruction of her trust. "Miranda, I had no idea it had been going on for so long. The security footage only goes back 2 months. 2 months of footage, but this has been happening for at least 6. I found hotel receipts, restaurant charges, even a jewelry purchase from Tiffany that I never received." Her voice cracked with bitter laughter. "He bought her a necklace with our anniversary money, Alex. With the money I thought he was investing in his new development project." The pieces were clicking together like a financial audit revealing systematic embezzlement. "What do you need from me, Miranda? I need a partner in this. Someone who understands exactly how much these two have stolen from us." Her tone shifted from grief to something calculating, strategic. "I've been married to a real estate developer for over 2 decades. I know where the bodies are buried, metaphorically speaking. Tony's been cutting corners on building permits, inflating property values, and I'm pretty sure he's been using some of our joint accounts to fund his little love nest adventures." This was getting interesting from both a personal and professional standpoint. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking Tony Marchetti is about to learn what happens when you betray someone who has access to all your financial records and knows exactly which city inspectors you've been bribing." The next morning, Vanessa tried to gaslight me over coffee, sitting at our kitchen island like nothing had happened, wearing one of my Northwestern University t-shirts like some kind of twisted domesticity performance. "Alex, I think you're overreacting to what happened yesterday. Our marriage has been dead for years. We both know it. What you saw was just the final confirmation of what we've both been avoiding." She stirred her oat milk latte with the silver spoon from our wedding china set, the casual audacity almost impressive. "I mean, we haven't been intimate in months. We barely talk except about household logistics. And let's be honest, we want completely different things from life." I slid a manila folder across the granite countertop, watching her expression change as she opened it to find printed screenshots of her text messages from the past 3 months. Messages to her sister calling me financially stable but emotionally dead. Messages to Tony calling our marriage a convenient arrangement until something better comes along. Messages to her book club friends describing me as the kind of man you marry for security, not passion. "You've been documenting our relationship's demise for public consumption while I thought we were working through a rough patch." Her face flushed red as she flipped through page after page of her own words. "Where did you get these?" "You went through my phone. I pay for the phone plan, Vanessa. The detailed records are readily available through our carrier's website, including text message logs." I sipped my black coffee, enjoying the role reversal as she squirmed under scrutiny for once. "Interesting reading. Particularly the part where you told Tony that I was too boring to ever suspect anything, and that I was the perfect husband for hiding an affair behind." She slammed the folder shut, but the damage was done. "What do you want, Alex? What's your endgame here?" "I want you to understand that actions have consequences, and that underestimating people is a dangerous game." I finished my coffee and headed toward the garage. "Speaking of consequences, I'm meeting someone today who really knows what kind of person you are. Should be an enlightening conversation." The fear in her eyes as I left was almost worth 7 years of marriage dissolving in real time. Miranda and I orchestrated the annual Lake Forest Country Club charity gala like a military operation, each detail planned with the precision I usually reserve for quarterly financial reports, and she applied to organizing society fundraisers that raised 6 figures for children's hospitals. The timing has to be perfect, she explained over coffee at a discreet cafe in Winnetka, far from our usual social circles. Tony thinks I'm planning to reconcile because I've been playing the devastated wife perfectly, crying at the right moments and asking him to attend couples therapy. Her acting skills were impressive, refined through decades of managing a real estate developer's public image while hiding his ethical shortcuts. Meanwhile, Vanessa thinks you're having some kind of midlife crisis breakdown and that she can manipulate you back into submission once you've had time to process your emotions. I almost laughed at how predictably they both underestimated us. The gala was perfect for our purposes, a black tie affair attended by Chicago's financial elite, city council members, federal judges, and the kind of people whose social approval Tony desperately needed for his business ventures. Miranda had volunteered to handle the evening's multimedia presentation, usually a boring slideshow showcasing the club's community achievements and member highlights, which gave her complete access to the audiovisual equipment. I've already confirmed that both Tony and Vanessa will be there, she said, scrolling through RSVPs on her tablet. Tony thinks it's his opportunity to publicly demonstrate our reconciliation and rebuild his reputation after some unfortunate business rumors have been circulating. Vanessa probably sees it as a chance to show off her affair trophy while humiliating you in front of your professional network. I'd convinced Vanessa to attend by suggesting we needed to discuss our future and the practical aspects of our separation, hinting that I might be open to a quiet divorce that wouldn't damage her social standing. She'd agreed immediately, probably assuming she could manipulate me into accepting her terms while surrounded by witnesses who would pressure me to avoid making a scene. The evening arrived with October's crisp air and the kind of elegant atmosphere that made people forget how brutal high society politics could be. I wore my best Tom Ford tuxedo, the one Vanessa had insisted I buy for last year's gala, while she appeared in a stunning red dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary, accompanied by jewelry that I suspected came from Tony's gilt gift collection. Tony was working the room in his typical style, glad-handing potential investors and acting like the successful businessman he pretended to be, while Miranda played the perfect society wife, graciously accepting condolences about their recent marital difficulties while positioning herself near the presentation equipment. The cocktail hour proceeded normally, with the usual conversations about market trends, real estate development projects, and charitable endeavors, while I watched Tony and Vanessa exchange subtle glances like teenagers passing notes in class. They were so focused on their secret communication that they missed the careful positioning Miranda and I had orchestrated, ensuring they'd both be prominently visible when the evening's main event began. Ladies and gentlemen, the club president announced as dinner concluded, we're delighted to present this year's member achievement slideshow, highlighting our community's remarkable contributions and celebrating the partnerships that make our organization strong. The lights dimmed as Miranda stepped to the podium, looking elegant and composed as she began the presentation with traditional photos of charity events, golf tournaments, and business achievements. Then, exactly 18 minutes into what should have been a 25-minute slideshow, the screen filled with crystal-clear footage from my bedroom security system, showing Tony and Vanessa in unmistakable detail, while audio captured their cruel laughter about deceiving their boring spouses. The reaction was immediate and devastating. Champagne glasses shattered against marble floors as shocked guests recognized the faces on screen, while cell phones emerged from evening bags and tuxedo pockets as people began recording the chaos. Security rushed toward the presentation booth, but Miranda had locked the door and the footage continued playing, showing not just their physical betrayal but audio of them mocking my career, my appearance, and my pathetic attempts at romance, while planning their next deception. "Turn it off," Tony was screaming, his face purple with rage and embarrassment as he pushed through the crowd of guests who were staring in fascination and horror. "This is illegal. This is harassment." But the damage was expanding exponentially as dozens of phones captured both the original footage and Tony's meltdown, ensuring the humiliation would live forever on social media platforms where Chicago's elite society shared gossip faster than stock market updates. Vanessa had gone completely white, frozen in her chair like a deer caught in headlights, while conversations erupted around her as people recognized the interior design consultant who'd been in their homes, measuring windows and selecting color schemes, while secretly conducting an affair that was now playing out in front of 300 of Chicago's most influential residents. Vanessa's desperate pregnancy announcement came exactly 48 hours after the country club humiliation, delivered through tears in our living room while I was packing my Northwestern University coffee mug collection into boxes. "Alex, we need to talk about something important. Something that changes everything." She sat on our white leather couch, hands dramatically placed over her stomach like she was protecting precious cargo. "I'm pregnant. 8 weeks along. I found out right before the gala. But with everything happening, I couldn't find the right moment to tell you." The timing was suspiciously convenient, especially considering she'd been religiously taking birth control and had recently mentioned scheduling an appointment with her gynecologist for a routine checkup that she'd mysteriously canceled. "This baby needs both parents, Alex. We can work through our problems for the sake of our child. People have affairs, marriages survive, but a child only gets one chance at having an intact family." I set down the box I was packing and studied her face, looking for the tells I'd learned to recognize after 7 years of marriage. The way her left eye twitched slightly when she lied about spending. How her voice got higher when she invented excuses for being late. How she touched her collarbone when she was manipulating a situation to her advantage. 8 weeks would put conception around the time Tony started coming around more frequently. Her hand moved to her collarbone. "That's impossible to determine, Alex. These things aren't exact sciences. What matters is that we're going to be parents, and we need to think about what's best for our family." The word family, coming from someone who'd spent months mocking our marriage, felt particularly hollow. But before I could respond, my phone rang with a call from Miranda. "Alex, you need to meet someone. There's a woman named Carmen Rodriguez who has information about Tony that you're going to want to hear. She was his business partner until recently, and apparently, there's more to this story than we realized." I agreed to meet at the same Winnetka Cafe where Miranda and I had planned our gala revenge, leaving Vanessa with a promise to discuss her announcement when I returned, though I was already forming my own plans for verification. Carmen Rodriguez turned out to be a sharp-featured woman in her early 40s with the kind of professional polish that came from years in commercial real estate development. But her eyes held the bitter knowledge of someone who'd been personally and professionally betrayed. "Tony Marchetti is a predator," she said without preamble, sliding a manila folder across the table. "I was his business partner for 3 years, and briefly, much more than that. He has a very specific pattern of behavior that he follows with every woman he targets." The folder contained photographs of jewelry, specifically platinum necklaces with custom engravings, identical except for the initials. He gives these to all his conquests. His signature gift, usually around the 6-week mark of the relationship, makes them feel special, like they're the only ones who matter to him. I stared at the photos, recognizing the necklace Vanessa had been wearing to the country club, the one she'd claimed was a gift from a client who appreciated her design work. "How many women are we talking about?" "At least 7 that I can confirm over the past 5 years, probably more." Carmen's voice was steady, businesslike, but I could hear the underlying anger. "He targets women who have access to resources he needs. Their connections, their money, their husband's business networks. Vanessa wasn't just an affair, Alex. She was a strategic acquisition." Miranda leaned forward, her expression grim. "Strategic how?" "Tony's been struggling financially for over 2 years. His real estate developments have been failing, he's leveraged beyond his means, and he's been using relationships to stay afloat." Carmen pulled out financial documents from the folder. "He was probably using Vanessa to get information about your clients, your firm's investment strategies, anything that could give him an advantage in his failing business ventures." The implications hit me like a financial audit revealing systematic fraud. Tony hadn't just seduced my wife. He'd been using her to potentially compromise my professional integrity and steal confidential client information. "There's more," Carmen continued. "I have bank records showing he's been funneling money through shell companies and using his relationships to launder funds from questionable deals. Vanessa's pregnancy claim is probably fake, but even if it's real, she needs to understand that Tony Marchetti is facing potential federal charges." When I returned home, Vanessa was waiting with what she probably thought was a convincing display of maternal glow, rubbing her stomach and looking through pregnancy magazines she'd never shown interest in before. I've been thinking about baby names, she said softly. Maybe something traditional, like Michael or Elizabeth. I want our child to have a strong, respectable name. I pulled out my phone and dialed the number for her gynecologist's office, putting it on speaker. I'd like to schedule an immediate appointment for my wife, Vanessa Peterson. We need pregnancy confirmation and dating. The color drained from her face. Alex, you can't just demand medical appointments. I'll schedule it myself when I'm ready. Dr. Martinez can see her tomorrow at 10 a.m., the receptionist confirmed. We'll need her to fast for 12 hours before the appointment for accurate blood work. After I hung up, Vanessa's composure cracked completely. This is insane, Alex. You're acting like I'm lying about carrying your child. What kind of man demands proof that his wife is pregnant? The kind of man whose wife has been conducting a strategic affair with a financial criminal who gives identical necklaces to all his targets. I showed her the photos Carmen had provided, watching her hand instinctively move to her throat where Tony's necklace usually rested. The kind of man who just discovered his wife was potentially being used to steal confidential client information that could destroy his career. The fear in her eyes told me everything I needed to know about both the pregnancy and the extent of her involvement with Tony's schemes. The revenge network expanded faster than I'd anticipated, turning into something that resembled a financial investigation more than personal vendetta. Carmen's evidence had attracted the attention of the Better Business Bureau, the Illinois Department of Financial and Professional Regulation, and eventually, a federal task force that specialized in securities fraud and money laundering schemes. My background as a financial analyst became invaluable as I helped organize the mountain of documentation that painted a clear picture of Tony's systematic exploitation of women and their resources for illegal financial gain. This is bigger than we initially thought, Agent Sarah Mitchell from the FBI's Financial Crimes Division explained during our meeting at the federal building downtown. Mr. Marchetti has been operating what essentially amounts to a romance-based Ponzi scheme, using intimate relationships to access insider information, launder money, and defraud investors across multiple states. The scope was staggering. Tony had been using his relationship with Vanessa not just for the affair itself, but to gain access to my professional network, client information, and investment strategies that he'd been selling to competitors and using for illegal insider trading. Phone records showed that Vanessa had been photographing documents from my home office, forwarding client meeting schedules, and even recording conversations during dinner parties where colleagues discussed upcoming market opportunities. Carmen's financial forensics revealed that Tony had established shell companies using information and connections from each of his targets, creating a web of fraudulent businesses that existed solely to move dirty money and hide assets from legitimate creditors. The evidence showed he'd been systematically targeting women married to professionals in finance, law, and real estate development, treating each relationship as a business opportunity rather than a romantic connection. Your wife may not have understood the full extent of what she was participating in, Agent Mitchell continued, but the evidence suggests she was actively facilitating securities fraud and potentially money laundering. The pregnancy claim appears to be a desperate attempt to avoid prosecution by claiming she was coerced or manipulated. Meanwhile, Vanessa's social destruction was happening in real time across Chicago's elite circles. The country club incident had gone viral within our social network, with multiple versions of the footage circulating on private social media groups and exclusive online communities where wealthy suburbanites shared gossip with the efficiency of a stock exchange. Her interior design business collapsed within a week as clients canceled contracts and demanded refunds, afraid of being associated with someone who'd been caught in such a public scandal. The Lake Forest Women's Club revoked her membership. The charity boards she'd served on quietly removed her name from their websites, and her yoga studio asked her not to return to avoid making other members uncomfortable. I can't even go to Whole Foods without people staring and whispering, she confessed during one of our final conversations before the federal investigation escalated. My own sister won't return my calls. Mom keeps asking how I could throw away everything we built together for someone who was just using me. The irony wasn't lost on me that she was finally understanding what it felt like to be treated as disposable. To have someone evaluate her worth purely in terms of what she could provide rather than who she was as a person. Tony's situation deteriorated even faster than Vanessa's. His real estate license was suspended pending investigation, his assets were frozen by federal court order, and several of his high-profile development projects were shut down when investigators discovered they'd been funded through fraudulent means. The Illinois Real Estate Commission launched their own investigation, uncovering a pattern of ethical violations, bribery, and fraudulent property valuations that stretched back over 5 years. His BMW was repossessed, his Lake Forest mansion went into foreclosure, and Miranda's divorce attorney had moved quickly to secure her assets before the federal seizures could claim everything. He's been served with indictments in 3 different states, Carmen reported during one of our coordination meetings. Illinois for securities fraud, Wisconsin for money laundering, and New York for wire fraud. The federal charges alone could put him away for 20 years. But the most satisfying development was watching how quickly Tony's social circle abandoned him once his financial crimes became public knowledge. The same men who'd envied his apparent success and lifestyle were now distancing themselves as quickly as possible, afraid that any association might taint their own reputations or attract unwanted federal scrutiny. His country club membership was terminated, his professional associations expelled him, and former business partners were publicly denouncing their previous relationships with him. The investigation revealed that I wasn't the only husband whose wife had been targeted by Tony's systematic seduction scheme, and a class action lawsuit was forming among the victims of his various fraudulent business ventures. The plaintiff list included investors who'd lost retirement savings, contractors who hadn't been paid for work, and multiple families whose personal information had been exploited for criminal enterprises. My own professional reputation emerged not only intact but enhanced, as colleagues and clients recognized that I'd been the victim of an elaborate criminal conspiracy rather than someone who'd failed to protect confidential information. The firm's partners actually offered me a promotion and commended my analytical skills in helping federal investigators untangle Tony's complex financial crimes. "You turned a personal betrayal into a federal investigation," my managing partner observed during my performance review. That's the kind of strategic thinking and attention to detail we value in our senior analysts. As the legal proceedings moved forward, I found myself oddly at peace with how everything had unfolded. The marriage I'd thought I wanted to save had been built on lies and manipulation, but discovering that truth had led me to understand my own worth and capabilities in ways I'd never imagined. Vanessa and Tony had underestimated not just my intelligence, but my capacity for strategic thinking when it came to protecting what truly mattered to me. Miranda's discovery of the secret joint accounts opened a financial rabbit hole that made Tony's previous crimes look like petty theft compared to organized racketeering. "Look at this," she said, spreading bank statements across the conference table in her attorney's office, her manicured fingers pointing to transactions that painted a picture of systematic money laundering spanning 3 years. Tony and Vanessa maintained these accounts under shell company names, moving money from his failed real estate deals through fake consulting contracts with her interior design business. The paper trail was damning and sophisticated, showing that Tony had been using Vanessa's legitimate business as a front to launder money from fraudulent property transactions, inflated construction loans, and kickbacks from corrupt city officials. Every deposit corresponded to one of Tony's questionable deals, and every withdrawal funded their luxurious getaways to places like the Cayman Islands, Switzerland, and Dubai, destinations I'd naively assumed were client appreciation trips for her design work. "The federal investigators are calling it a textbook money laundering operation," Miranda continued, her voice carrying the satisfaction of someone who'd finally found the weapon to destroy her husband's criminal empire. "They moved over $2.3 million through these accounts in the past 18 months alone, using Vanessa's business credentials to make the transactions appear legitimate." But the most shocking revelation came when the FBI's forensic accountants discovered that Tony had been using Vanessa's access to my professional network to facilitate insider trading on an industrial scale. Phone records showed that she'd been systematically reporting on confidential client conversations, upcoming merger announcements, and strategic investment decisions that my firm was handling for major corporations. "Your wife was essentially operating as an industrial spy," Agent Mitchell explained during our follow-up meeting. "Every dinner party, every social gathering, every casual conversation you had about work was being documented and sold to competing firms and individual investors who used the information to manipulate stock prices and commodity futures. The scope of the betrayal was staggering. Vanessa hadn't just been cheating on our marriage. She'd been systematically compromising my professional integrity and potentially exposing our clients to millions of dollars in losses through coordinated market manipulation. The evidence showed that Tony's real estate ventures were failing specifically because he'd been diverting resources into these illegal trading schemes that generated much higher returns with less oversight. Federal investigators had traced the conspiracy across state lines, involving banks in Nevada, shell companies in Delaware, and offshore accounts in the British Virgin Islands. Tony and Vanessa's operation had grown sophisticated enough to attract the attention of international financial crime units, and several foreign nationals were now facing extradition requests for their participation in the money laundering network. The investigation has revealed connections to organized crime families in New Jersey and money laundering operations linked to drug trafficking from Mexico, Agent Mitchell continued. What started as marital infidelity has uncovered a criminal enterprise that was using romance and seduction as entry points into legitimate financial networks. My role as an unwitting victim had evolved into that of a key witness whose analytical skills were helping prosecutors build cases against multiple defendants across several jurisdictions. The irony wasn't lost on me that my marriage's destruction was leading to the biggest financial crime investigation in Illinois state history, with implications that reached far beyond Tony and Vanessa's personal betrayals. The legal holds preventing Vanessa from leaving the state had been upgraded to federal restrictions that essentially placed her under house arrest, while investigators determined the full extent of her cooperation with Tony's criminal enterprises. She'd hired a criminal defense attorney who was negotiating with federal prosecutors for a plea agreement that might reduce her potential prison time in exchange for testimony against Tony and his other co-conspirators. She's facing 15 to 20 years if this goes to trial, Miranda's divorce attorney informed me during one of our strategy sessions. The money laundering charges alone carry mandatory minimums that her lawyer can't negotiate away, and the securities fraud charges add another decade to her potential sentence. Tony's situation had become even more desperate as additional victims came forward with evidence of romance-based fraud schemes dating back over 8 years. The FBI had identified at least 12 other women who'd been targeted by Tony's systematic seduction and exploitation tactics, with financial damages totaling over $15 million in stolen assets, fraudulent investments, and market manipulation schemes. He's been operating this romance-based criminal enterprise since at least 2016, Agent Mitchell explained. Each relationship followed the same pattern. Identify a target with access to valuable information or financial resources. Seduce them with expensive gifts and promises of exclusive relationships. Then exploit their trust to facilitate various criminal activities. The federal grand jury had issued indictments that included charges for racketeering, money laundering, securities fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy to commit financial crimes, and organized criminal enterprise operations. Tony was looking at a potential life sentence if convicted on all counts, while Vanessa faced the possibility of spending the next 2 decades in federal prison for her role in the conspiracy. But perhaps the most satisfying development was watching how the investigation had revealed the true scope of their contempt for me and everyone else they'd exploited. Recorded phone conversations between Tony and Vanessa showed them laughing about my pathetic naivety while planning which of my clients to target next, discussing my colleagues like they were potential marks in an ongoing con game, and treating our entire social circle as a resource to be exploited for criminal gain. They called you their golden goose, Agent Mitchell said, playing audio recordings that captured Vanessa describing me as completely clueless but perfectly positioned to provide everything we need. The recordings revealed that they'd been planning to divorce our respective spouses simultaneously, combine their stolen assets, and relocate to a country without extradition treaties once they'd exhausted the criminal opportunities in our social network. Tony's federal trial became the most high-profile white-collar criminal case in Chicago since the Enron prosecutions, with media coverage that turned his systematic romance-based fraud scheme into a cautionary tale about financial crime and predatory manipulation. The prosecution presented evidence of a criminal enterprise that had defrauded investors of over $23 million while using seduction and intimate relationships as weapons for financial exploitation spanning multiple states and international jurisdictions. He was ultimately convicted on 47 separate federal charges and sentenced to 35 years in federal prison without possibility of parole, with additional restitution requirements that would keep him financially ruined for the rest of his life. His real estate empire was completely liquidated to pay victim compensation. His personal assets were seized and auctioned, and he'd aged 20 years during the 18 months between his arrest and sentencing. Vanessa's plea agreement required her to testify against Tony and forfeit all assets that could be traced to their criminal activities, but she still received an 8-year federal prison sentence for money laundering and conspiracy charges that her attorney couldn't negotiate away. The fake pregnancy claim had been exposed during her initial medical examination, adding perjury and obstruction of justice charges that eliminated any possibility of a suspended sentence or house arrest alternative. Her interior design business was permanently closed, her professional licenses were revoked, and she'd lost everything she'd spent years building while chasing the illusion of easy money and exciting romance. But the most transformative outcome was how the investigation had led me to discover a passion for financial forensics that changed my entire career trajectory. Working with federal investigators to untangle Tony's complex money laundering schemes had revealed analytical abilities I'd never fully utilized in traditional financial analysis, and the Chicago Tribune offered me a position as their senior financial crimes correspondent covering white-collar prosecutions and regulatory investigations. The work was fascinating, intellectually challenging, and provided a sense of purpose that my previous job had never offered, allowing me to use my skills to expose financial predators and protect potential victims from sophisticated fraud schemes. You have an unusual talent for seeing patterns in financial data that even experienced investigators miss, Agent Mitchell told me during my final witness debriefing. Have you ever considered transitioning into financial crimes investigation as a career? The FBI's Forensic Accounting Division is always looking for analysts with your combination of technical skills and investigative instincts. The opportunity was tempting, but my journalism career was providing exactly the kind of intellectual stimulation and social impact I'd been searching for without realizing it. My articles about Tony's case had led to policy changes in how financial institutions report suspicious relationship-based transactions, and several other romance-based fraud schemes had been exposed as a result of increased public awareness about these predatory tactics. I'd moved to a contemporary loft apartment in River North, closer to the Tribune offices and completely removed from the suburban social circles where Vanessa and Tony had operated their criminal enterprise. The space was modern, efficient, and entirely my own, decorated with photography equipment I'd started using to document financial crime scenes and evidence for my investigative reporting. Photography had become an unexpected passion, combining my analytical eye with artistic expression in ways that felt both challenging and deeply satisfying. The contrast between my new life and the suburban pretense I'd been living was striking. Instead of country clubs, social obligations, and dinner parties with people who saw relationships as networking opportunities, I was building genuine friendships with journalists, photographers, and investigators who valued intellectual honesty and meaningful work over social status and financial positioning. My weekends were spent exploring Chicago neighborhoods with my camera, documenting stories about economic inequality and financial exploitation that gave voice to victims of white-collar crime. 6 months after Tony's sentencing, I received a letter from Vanessa in federal prison, attempting to apologize and asking for some kind of reconciliation or forgiveness that would help her emotionally process her incarceration. The letter was self-serving and manipulative, focusing more on her own suffering than acknowledgement of the damage she'd caused to me and countless other victims of their criminal enterprise. I read it once, filed it with the other case documents for my archives, and never responded. Some people deserve second chances, but some betrayals are so systematic and calculated that forgiveness becomes enabling rather than healing. A year after everything began with that shocking bedroom discovery, I was covering a federal financial crimes conference when I spotted Miranda across the hotel lobby. She looked relaxed and confident in ways I'd never seen during our revenge planning sessions, having successfully rebuilt her life after extracting herself from Tony's criminal web and toxic influence. She'd started her own consulting business, helping other women navigate complex divorces involving financial fraud, and her experience with Tony's systematic deception had made her an expert in recognizing and documenting white-collar criminal behavior. "You know what the strangest part is?" she said over coffee as we caught up on how dramatically our lives had changed. "I'm actually grateful this happened. Not for the pain and betrayal, but for forcing me to discover who I really am when I'm not trying to maintain someone else's facade or enable their destructive behavior." She was absolutely right. The destruction of my marriage had been devastating, but it had also freed me from a relationship built on deception and manipulation, allowing me to discover professional passions and personal strengths I'd never known I possessed. Tony and Vanessa had intended to use and discard me once they'd extracted everything valuable from my life and network, but instead, their criminal behavior had led me to a career and lifestyle that was infinitely more fulfilling than anything I'd had before. Today, I'm preparing for my next investigative assignment, a multi-part series about romance-based financial fraud that will help other potential victims recognize warning signs and protect themselves from predatory manipulation. My apartment walls display photographs from crime scenes, financial documents, and investigative reports that tell stories of justice and accountability rather than betrayal and exploitation.